The banker's face had gone white as winter when he saw the signature on the deed transfer. "Mr. Holloway," he stammered. "I had no idea you were." But by then, Grace Turner had already walked out into the dusty street, her worn boots clicking against the boardwalk, carrying the truth she'd just discovered like a stone in her chest. The quiet cowboy she'd pitied, the one she'd invited to share her table because no man should eat alone, owned half the territory. And now he owned her ranch, too. But that revelation lay 3 weeks ahead. The story began differently. On a Tuesday afternoon, when the autumn sun slanted through the windows of the Caldera Springs boarding house dining room, Grace stood near the kitchen door, wiping her hands on her apron, surveying the half-empty room. 6 tables, only 3 occupied. The railroad men sat together as always, loud and confident. The widow Patterson picked at her chicken, reading a letter that made her eyes shine with tears. And in the corner, at the smallest table by the window, sat a man Grace had never seen before. He was perhaps 40, maybe older. Hard to tell with men shaped by weather and work. His hat rested on the chair beside him, revealing dark hair touched with gray. His face was lean, weathered, marked by a scar along his jaw that had healed crooked. He wore clean clothes, but they were worn: canvas trousers, a faded shirt, scuffed boots. Everything about him said working man, but something in the way he held himself, quiet and still as deep water, suggested more. He ate slowly, methodically, staring at nothing. Grace had buried her husband 2 years before. Influenza had taken Daniel in 3 days, left her with the boarding house, 7 paying rooms, and a grief that still woke her some mornings with its teeth in her throat. She'd learned to recognize loneliness. It looked different on every person, but it carried the same weight. She walked to his table. "More coffee." He glanced up. His eyes were gray, calm, guarded. "Thank you, ma'am." She poured, noting the calluses on his hands, the careful way he moved his fork, like a man who'd learned table manners late but learned them well. "You passing through?" "No, ma'am. Working at the Collins Ranch." Grace knew the Collins place. 5 miles south, decent operation. "You one of the new hands?" "Yes, ma'am." 3 words in a row. She almost smiled. "I'm Grace Turner. I run the boarding house. Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Turner." He didn't offer his name. The silence stretched. Grace had learned to let silence speak. Finally, he added, "Ben Holloway." "Well, Mr. Holloway, that corner table's awful lonely. You're welcome to join the others if you'd like." "I'm fine here, ma'am. Thank you." But something in his face when he glanced at the railroad man, not fear, not discomfort, just a deep weariness with loud voices and false cheer, made Grace understand. "Then you're welcome here any time," she said gently. "Supper's at 6 most evenings." He nodded once, a small gesture that carried surprising gratitude. Ben Holloway became a fixture after that. He came every Tuesday and Friday, paid in cash, ate quietly, spoke little. The railroad man tried to draw him into conversation once. He answered politely but briefly, and they soon gave up. He wasn't unfriendly. He simply carried a privacy around him like a coat. Grace watched him more than she intended. She noticed how he always left exact change, never a penny more or less. How he thanked her every time she refilled his coffee. How he once helped old Mrs. Patterson with her shawl when it slipped. A gesture so gentle and instinctive that Grace felt something shift in her chest. 3 weeks after his first visit, she made beef stew, Daniel's favorite. The smell filled the dining room, and for a moment Grace stood in the kitchen doorway, remembering her husband's laugh, the way he'd always sneak a taste before supper. When she brought Ben his bowl, he looked up at her and said quietly, "You all right, ma'am?" The question surprised her. No one asked anymore. Brief was supposed to have a timetable, and she'd exceeded hers. "Just memories," she said. He nodded slowly. "They come when they come." Something in his tone told her he knew. She pulled out the chair across from him. "May I?" "It's your place, ma'am." "Grace," she corrected. "And yes, it is. But you're paying for peace, and I don't want to intrude." "You're not." So she sat. They ate in comfortable silence for a while. Then Grace asked, "You lose someone?" "Yes, ma'am. My wife. 6 years back. Fever." "I'm sorry." "Likewise." More silence, but it felt like conversation. Finally, Grace said, "It's hard, eating alone. Cooking for one." "It is." She made a decision. "You're welcome to eat here free, Mr. Holloway." No man should have to. I pay my way, ma'am. His voice was firm, but not unkind. I'm not offering charity. I'm offering company. He studied her face carefully, as if reading words written in small print. Then he did something unexpected. He almost smiled. Then I'm grateful, Mrs. Turner. Grace. Grace. But what Grace didn't know, what she couldn't know as she sat across from the quiet cowboy with the scarred jaw and gentle hands, was that Ben Holloway didn't work at the Collins Ranch. He owned it. He owned the Patterson spread, too, and the railroad stock, and half the grazing land between Caldera Springs and the mountains. And soon, when her bank note came due, he would own everything she had left of Daniel. The bank letter arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered by young Timothy Moss, who couldn't meet Grace's eyes when he handed it over. She stood on the boarding house porch, October wind pulling at her skirts, and read the notice twice before its meaning settled into her bones like winter cold. Payment due in full. 30 days. $1,500. She'd known it was coming. The note Daniel had taken to expand the boarding house had seemed manageable when he was alive, when his carpentry business brought steady income. But alone, even with 7 rooms filled most nights, Grace had barely kept ahead of the interest. The principal sat untouched, growing heavier each month like a stone around her neck. $1,500 might as well have been $15,000. Inside, she sank into the kitchen chair Daniel had built, the one with the uneven leg he'd never gotten around to fixing. Her hands trembled as she set the letter down. She would lose everything. The boarding house. The only piece of Daniel she had left. That evening, Ben Holloway came for supper as usual. Grace served him mechanically, her mind calculating impossible sums, considering desperate options. She could ask the bank for more time. She could try to sell. She could. Something's wrong. She looked up. Ben was watching her with those calm gray eyes that missed nothing. I'm fine. No, you're not. Grace almost laughed at the certainty in his voice. With respect, Mr. Holloway, you barely know me. I know you filled my coffee 3 times without my asking. I know you forgot to bring bread. I know you're gripping that serving spoon like it's the only thing holding you upright. She set the spoon down carefully. I received a letter from the bank. He waited. I have 30 days to pay my note. I don't have the money. How much? More than I can raise. She met his gaze. I'm going to lose this place. Ben was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, there might be another way. Something in his tone made her wary. I won't accept charity. Not charity. Business. He leaned back in his chair. I could buy the note from the bank. You'd pay me instead, at better terms. Grace stared at him. You're a ranch hand. I've saved. $1,500? I've saved well. The offer hung between them, impossible and perfect, and somehow wrong. Grace had learned that nothing came without cost. Why would you do that? Because I remember what it's like to lose everything. Because you're good people. Because I eat here twice a week and I'd miss your cooking. The last part made her smile despite everything. But suspicion lingered. What would you want in return? Payment when you can manage it. No interest. Mr. Holloway, Ben. She shook her head. That's charity dressed up as business. No, ma'am. That's one person helping another. The way it ought to be. Grace wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. But she'd learned that men who offered help often expected things that were never discussed in the light. I can't accept. You can. He met her gaze steadily. And you should. Unless you've got a better plan. She didn't. They both knew it. 2 days later, Ben walked into Caldera Springs Bank and paid Grace's note in full. The banker, a thin man named Cyrus Webb, counted the cash twice before drawing up the papers. Grace stood beside Ben, watching, feeling like she'd stepped into a river whose current she couldn't judge. When they walked out, she owned nothing. Ben owned everything. But the papers he'd signed listed the payment as a loan, just as he'd promised. Thank you, she said quietly. I'll pay you back. Every penny. I know you will. Something had shifted between them. Grace felt it as they walked back to the boarding house together, Ben carrying the documents carefully, his presence steady beside her. He was no longer just the quiet cowboy who ate alone. He was the man who'd saved everything she had. That evening, she cooked his favorite meal without being asked. Beef stew, fresh bread, apple pie. He ate slowly as always, but when he looked at her across the table, something warmed in his eyes. Best meal I've had in 6 years, he said. You say that every time. I mean it every time. The boarding house felt different after that. Ben came more often, not just Tuesdays and Fridays but Sundays, too. He fixed the uneven table leg without asking. He replaced 3 porch boards that had rotted through. He sat with Mrs. Patterson when her arthritis flared, listening to stories about her late husband with the patience of a saint. Grace watched him and felt something dangerous growing in her chest. Not love, it was too soon for that, but possibility. The shape of something that might become love, given time. 6 weeks after Ben had paid her note, Grace walked into the general store to buy flour. She overheard 2 ranch wives talking by the fabric bolts. "Did you hear Collins sold his place?" "To who?" "Same man who bought Patterson's spread last year." "Holloway." Grace's hand stilled on the flour sack. "I heard he owns the railroad stock, too. Half the territory belongs to him now. Must be nice, being that rich." The women moved on, laughing. Grace stood frozen, their words echoing in her head. Holloway owns half the territory. The quiet cowboy who ate alone. The man who'd saved her boarding house. Who'd claimed he was a ranch hand who'd saved well. He'd lied. That evening, when Ben arrived for supper, Grace set his plate down harder than necessary. "We need to talk." He looked up, reading her face instantly. "You heard. Were you ever going to tell me?" Her voice shook. "Or were you just going to keep pretending to be a simple ranch hand?" "I never pretended. You let me believe it. You let me pity you." Ben stood slowly. "I never wanted pity." "Then what did you want?" Grace demanded. "Why did you lie?" "I didn't lie. You assumed. I just didn't correct you." "That's the same thing." "No." His voice stayed calm, but something fierce entered his eyes. "It's not. I've spent 6 years watching people change when they learn my name. Watching them smile different, talk different, want things they didn't want before. You were the first person in half a decade who just saw me." The words struck her silent. "I should have told you," he admitted quietly. "Before I paid your note. That was wrong. But I'm telling you now." He pulled papers from his coat pocket and set them on the table. "The boarding house is yours. Free and clear. No note. No payment required." Grace stared at the deed, her name written in careful script. "I don't understand. I'm a wealthy man, Grace. But wealth didn't keep my wife from dying. Didn't make grief any lighter. Didn't fill the silence." He met her gaze. "You gave me something no amount of money could buy. You gave me a place at your table when you thought I had nothing. That's worth more than $1,500. Her throat tightened. "I don't want charity. It's not charity. It's gratitude. Ben, keep it or burn it. That's your choice. But either way, you don't owe me anything." He turned to leave. Grace watched him walk toward the door. This man she'd thought she understood. This stranger who'd become something more. "Wait." He stopped. "Is that really why you did it?" she asked. "Because I was kind to you?" Ben turned back slowly. "No." Her heart thudded. "I did it because somewhere between the beef stew and the coffee refills and the way you smile at Mrs. Patterson, I started falling in love with you." His voice roughened. "And I couldn't stand the thought of you losing everything." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest and impossible to take back. Grace pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart race. "You love me." "Yes, ma'am." "You own half the territory." "Yes, ma'am." "And you're giving me my boarding house." "Yes, ma'am." She looked at him, truly looked, and saw past the quiet exterior to the man beneath. Lonely, honest, carrying his own grief like she carried hers. "You're a damn fool, Ben Holloway." He almost smiled. "I've been called worse." "Why? Didn't you tell me from the start? Would you have believed me? Or would you have thought I was another rich man trying to buy something he wanted?" Grace had no answer for that. Because he was right. She would have doubted everything. "I don't know what to do with this," she admitted, gesturing at the deed. "Then don't do anything yet. Just think about it." He settled his hat on his head. "I'll be at the hotel if you need me. You're not staying for supper? I think you need time alone." He was giving her space, giving her choice, giving her everything, asking nothing in return. After he left, Grace sat in the kitchen holding the deed, watching darkness fall outside the window. The boarding house was hers. Truly hers, no strings attached. But her heart was tangled in something far more complicated than gratitude. Because somewhere between the beef stew and the quiet conversations and the way Ben had looked at her when he confessed his love, she'd started falling, too. And that terrified her more than any bank note ever could. Grace didn't sleep that night. She lay in the dark bedroom she'd once shared with Daniel, holding the deed Ben had given her, turning it over and over like it might reveal secrets in different light. The paper was real, the signature genuine. Her boarding house belonged to her. No debt, no obligation. But nothing felt free. By dawn, she'd made a decision. She dressed carefully in her blue calico dress, the one Daniel had always liked, and walked through the quiet streets of Caldera Springs to the hotel. The desk clerk directed her to room 12. She climbed the stairs, her heart beating hard against her ribs, and knocked. Ben answered in shirt sleeves, his hair uncombed, his eyes cautious. "Grace, may I come in?" He stepped aside. The room was plain, neat. A single bag sat by the bed, still packed. He hadn't planned to stay long. Grace set the deed on the small table. "I can't accept this." Something crossed his face. Not surprise. Resignation. "All right. Let me finish." She took a breath. "I can't accept it as a gift, but I'll accept it as payment." His brow furrowed. "Payment for what?" "For 6 months of meals. Starting now. 3 times a day, 7 days a week. You'll eat at my table, and in return, the boarding house stays mine." Ben stared at her. "Grace, that's not remotely equal value." "It is to me." He opened his mouth, closed it. Then he said carefully, "Are you sure? Because once you agree to feed me 3 meals a day, you're going to see a lot of me." "I'm counting on it." The words hung between them. Ben's expression shifted, vulnerability and hope warring in his eyes. "Why?" "Because you were right. You were the first man since Daniel died who saw me. Not the widow, not the struggling boarding house owner. Just me." Her voice steadied. "And I'd like to see you too. Not the rich rancher. Not the man who owns half the territory. Just you. You already do. Then I'd like to keep doing it." Ben stepped closer. 3 meals a day is a lot of time together. "Yes. People will talk. Let them." "Grace." His voice dropped. "I meant what I said yesterday. I'm in love with you. Spending that much time together is only going to make it worse." Her heart hammered. "What if it doesn't have to be worse?" He went very still. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm not ready for love yet. The grief is still too close, too heavy. But I'm ready for possibility." She met his gaze. "I'm ready to see where 3 meals a day might lead." For a long moment, Ben just looked at her. Then he said quietly, "I can wait. However long you need. Even if it's years." Even then, Grace believed him. And that made all the difference. They shook hands like business partners, though his touch lingered warm against her palm. That afternoon, Ben moved into room 7 at the boarding house. He paid full rate, insisted on it. Grace cooked, and he ate. And slowly the other boarders grew accustomed to seeing him at the head of the long dining table, passing bread, listening to Mrs. Patterson's stories, helping old Mr. Chun with his English. Weeks became months. Autumn turned to winter. The first snow fell, covering Caldera Springs in white silence. Grace and Ben fell into a rhythm that felt like music neither of them had known they could make. Morning coffee before dawn, just the two of them in the quiet kitchen. Supper conversations that stretched long after the dishes were cleared. Evenings by the fire, reading aloud, sharing silence. He never pushed, never demanded more than she offered. But his presence steadied her, filled spaces she hadn't realized were empty. One evening in January, Grace found him on the porch, staring at the snow-covered street. She brought him coffee and stood beside him, their shoulders almost touching. "You're thinking loud," she said. He smiled faintly. "I was thinking about the first time I came here. How I almost kept riding past. How I almost stayed lonely. What made you stop?" "The smell of your cooking. And the way the lamplight looked in the windows. Like home." Grace's throat tightened. "Is this home now? Has been since you let me sit at your table." She set down her coffee and turned to face him. "Ben." He looked down at her, waiting. "I'm ready." "Ready for what?" "To stop calling this possibility. To call it what it is." His eyes searched her face. "And what is it, Grace?" "Love." The word felt both terrifying and right. "I love you. I don't know when it happened exactly. Maybe that first night when you helped Mrs. Patterson. Maybe yesterday when you fixed the broken step without asking. Maybe it's been growing this whole time, so slow I didn't recognize it." Ben cupped her face gently. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." He kissed her then, soft and careful, like she was something precious he'd been entrusted to protect. Grace leaned into him, let herself feel the warmth of him, the solidness. This was different from Daniel. Not better or worse, just different. A second chance she'd never expected. When they pulled apart, He rested his forehead against hers. Will you marry me? Yes. Even though I own half the territory? Because you gave me my boarding house. Because you waited. Because you see me. They married in March, when the snow began to melt and wildflowers pushed through the last patches of white. The whole town came. Mrs. Patterson cried. Mr. Chun read a blessing in Chinese. The railroad man gave them a bottle of whiskey they'd been saving for something special. Afterward, Ben carried Grace over the threshold of the boarding house that was now theirs together. I have a confession, he said. She looked up at him warily. Another secret? More of an admission. He set her down gently. I never worked at the Collins Ranch. I owned it the whole time. I know. I own most of the I know, Ben. She touched his scarred jaw. I figured that out months ago. And you still said yes? I said yes because you're a damn fool who tried to give me a boarding house. Because you eat my cooking 3 times a day and never complain. Because you make Mrs. Patterson laugh. She smiled. And because you love me anyway. The widow. The woman who pitied the quiet cowboy eating alone. I never minded the pity, he admitted. Admit you saw me when I needed seeing. I'll always see you. Even when I'm old and gray. Especially then. They stood in the front hallway of the boarding house, surrounded by the life Grace had built, the life Ben had saved, the life they would build together. Outside, Caldera Springs settled into evening, lamps flickering on one by one. Inside, the quiet cowboy who owned half the territory held his wife close, and neither of them felt lonely anymore. Because Grace had taken pity on a stranger eating alone, and he had loved her enough to wait until pity became something deeper.